Number 1. Ronnie McNutt. The Facebook Live tragedy that haunted millions. On the evening of August 31, 2020, a 33-year-old military veteran named Ronnie McNutt sat in front of his computer in his New Albany, Mississippi home, logged onto Facebook Live, and began streaming what would become one of the most traumatic and widely circulated videos in internet history. Ronnie was known among his small circle of online friends as a friendly, outgoing man who had served in the Iraq War and worked at a Toyota plant in Blue Springs. But beneath his outwardly sociable demeanor lay a deep struggle with PTSD, depression, and recent relationship problems that had left him emotionally devastated. In the days leading up to that fateful night, Ronnie had been going through an exceptionally difficult period after breaking up with his longtime girlfriend, and friends later reported that he had been drinking heavily and expressing increasingly dark thoughts about his future. As the live stream began around 10:30 p.m., viewers who knew Ronnie started joining the broadcast, initially thinking it might be another one of his casual streaming sessions where he would talk about his day, discuss current events, or simply chat with friends online. However, within minutes of starting the stream, it became horrifyingly clear that something was terribly wrong as Ronnie appeared visibly intoxicated and began making statements about not wanting to continue living, repeatedly mentioning his ex-girlfriend and expressing feelings of hopelessness that immediately alarmed those watching. Several viewers frantically began calling police and trying to reach out to Ronnie through the chat function, desperately attempting to talk him down and convince him to end the stream and seek help, while others called his family members and local emergency services, providing his address and explaining the urgent situation unfolding live on their screens. Despite these frantic efforts, at approximately 10:49 p.m., as police were already en route to his home and while an estimated 200 people watched in real-time horror, Ronnie retrieved a rifle, pointed it at himself, and took his own life on camera in a moment that would be captured, recorded, and subsequently spread across virtually every major social media platform in the world. The immediate aftermath was chaotic as viewers sat in shock, some continuing to watch the stream hoping it was somehow fake, while others immediately began screen recording the footage, and within hours, the video began circulating on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, and numerous other platforms despite the desperate efforts of moderators and platform administrators to contain its spread. What made this tragedy particularly insidious was how the video was deliberately edited and disguised by malicious actors who would clip the footage to show seemingly innocuous content at the beginning. Cute animals, cooking tutorials, or other benign material, before suddenly cutting to the graphic final moments, a tactic designed to bypass content filters and traumatize unsuspecting viewers who had no warning about what they were about to witness. Social media platforms struggled to control the viral spread as the video was uploaded thousands of times per hour, with users creating new accounts specifically to repost the footage, sometimes out of morbid curiosity, other times with the explicit intention of causing psychological harm to random viewers, and the sheer volume of uploads overwhelmed even the most sophisticated content moderation systems. TikTok was particularly inundated with uploads, and the platform issued emergency statements urging users to report the video immediately and warning them to scroll past any content that appeared suspicious. While Facebook faced intense criticism for allowing the original live stream to continue for so long without automated systems detecting and stopping it, mental health professionals warned about the severe psychological impact on viewers, particularly young people who encountered the footage unexpectedly, with reports of PTSD symptoms, nightmares, anxiety attacks, and lasting trauma among those who witnessed the video, leading to calls for better mental health support and content moderation policies across all platforms. Ronnie's family was devastated not only by his death but by the fact that his final moments became public spectacle, with his mother and other relatives speaking out about the profound violation they felt as they watched strangers share and comment on the most tragic moment of their family's life, turning personal grief into viral content consumed by millions. The case sparked intense debate about the responsibilities of social media platforms in preventing such content from spreading, with critics arguing that companies like Facebook had failed in their duty to protect users by allowing the live stream to continue and not having adequate systems to prevent the subsequent viral spread, while platforms defended their efforts by pointing to the unprecedented scale of the uploads and the sophisticated tactics used to evade detection. In the months following Ronnie's death, Facebook and other platforms implemented new policies and improved their content detection algorithms specifically designed to identify and remove this type of content more quickly, while also adding additional warnings and resources for users who might be experiencing suicidal thoughts. Ronnie's story became a tragic symbol of the intersection between mental health crises and social media's ability to amplify and perpetuate trauma, highlighting the urgent need for better mental health support systems, more responsible platform governance, and greater awareness of the lasting psychological impact that graphic content can have on viewers who encounter it online. His death was ruled a suicide, and while no criminal charges were filed because the act itself was not illegal, the case prompted discussions about whether there should be legal consequences for those who deliberately spread such content with the intent to cause harm, with some jurisdictions beginning to consider legislation that would criminalize the malicious distribution of graphic suicide footage. Mental health organizations used Ronnie's case to advocate for better crisis intervention resources, improved access to mental health care for veterans, and more robust suicide prevention programs, while also educating the public about the warning signs of suicidal ideation and how to respond when someone expresses thoughts of self-harm. The lasting impact of this tragedy extends far beyond the immediate horror of that August night, serving as a stark reminder of both the mental health crisis affecting millions of people and the profound ethical challenges posed by live streaming technology that can turn private moments of desperation into public trauma that spreads across the globe in minutes. Number 2. Bianca Devins. The Instagram murder that shocked a generation. On July 14, 2019, 17-year-old Bianca Devins, a popular e-girl and social media personality from Utica, New York, attended a concert in New York City with 21-year-old Brandon Clark, a man she had met online and maintained a complicated relationship with that friends later described as predominantly platonic, but which Clark appeared to view through a romantic lens that Bianca did not reciprocate. Bianca had built a significant following across multiple platforms including Instagram, Discord, and various gaming communities, where she was known for her distinctive aesthetic, her openness about mental health struggles, and her genuine kindness toward fans and friends who described her as someone who always made time to talk to people going through difficult times and offered support to others dealing with depression and anxiety. The relationship between Bianca and Brandon had become increasingly strained in the weeks leading up to July 14th, with Brandon displaying possessive behavior and becoming upset when Bianca interacted with other men online or in person, a dynamic that several of Bianca's friends had noticed and worried about, though Bianca herself seemed to believe she could manage the situation and maintain boundaries with Brandon. On the night of the concert, Bianca and Brandon attended the show together, but at some point during or after the event, Bianca apparently kissed another man, an act that witnesses later reported sent Brandon into a jealous rage that he initially suppressed, but which festered as they drove back to Utica in the early morning hours of July 15th. As Brandon drove them back to Utica around dawn, the situation escalated into an argument about Bianca's interaction with the other man, and at approximately 7:20 a.m., Brandon pulled his car into a dead-end street near Oneida Street, and what happened next was a horrifically violent attack that would shock the nation and expose the darkest intersections of online culture, male entitlement, and social media's role in amplifying tragedy. Brandon pulled Bianca from the vehicle and viciously attacked her with a knife, slashing her throat and stabbing her repeatedly in a frenzied assault that left the young woman with catastrophic injuries. And after murdering her, Brandon took photographs of Bianca's body and began posting them to his own Instagram account and to Discord servers where Bianca was active, deliberately sharing the images with communities that knew and cared about her in an act of psychological terrorism designed to maximize trauma and shock. The photos showed Bianca's body lying on the ground with horrific neck wounds visible, and Brandon accompanied the images with captions that suggested he had killed her because she had rejected him romantically or been unfaithful to what he believed was their relationship, framing the murder as some twisted act of passion rather than the brutal act of violence and control that it truly was. Within minutes, the images began circulating across Instagram, Discord, 4chan, and other platforms as users shared them in shock and horror, with many of Bianca's friends and followers forced to see the brutal images of her death as they scrolled through their feeds, creating a secondary trauma that compounded the initial tragedy of her murder. After posting the photos, Brandon called 911 and made statements indicating he intended to harm himself. And when police arrived at the scene around 7:30 a.m., they found Brandon lying on the ground near his car with self-inflicted wounds to his neck, though the injuries were not fatal, and he was immediately taken into custody and transported to a hospital for treatment. The investigation revealed that this was not a spontaneous act of passion, but rather a calculated murder committed by a man who could not accept that Bianca did not reciprocate his romantic feelings. And detectives found evidence that Brandon had been obsessively monitoring Bianca's social media accounts and had become increasingly agitated by her interactions with other men in the weeks before the murder. The viral spread of Bianca's death photos became a secondary nightmare for her family, who found themselves battling an endless tide of reposts as the images spread across platforms faster than moderators could remove them, with some users deliberately re-uploading the photos to shock and traumatize others, while others claimed they were sharing the images to raise awareness about violence against women, a justification that Bianca's family rejected as hollow exploitation of their daughter's death. Bianca's mother, Kim Devins, became a vocal advocate for better content moderation policies and faster response times from social media platforms, repeatedly calling out Instagram, Discord, and other companies for their failure to prevent the images from spreading and for the trauma inflicted on family members who would receive notifications that the photos were being shared and tagged with Bianca's name and their own accounts. The platform's responses were widely criticized as inadequate, with Instagram taking hours to fully remove the images from circulation and smaller platforms like Discord struggling to control the spread across countless private servers where users shared the photos in closed communities that were harder for moderators to monitor. Brandon Clark was charged with second-degree murder, and as the case proceeded through the court system, prosecutors presented evidence of his obsessive behavior, his possessive attitude toward Bianca, and his deliberate choice to photograph and share images of her body as a final act of control and violation. Brandon initially pleaded not guilty, but in February 2020, he changed his plea to guilty on the second-degree murder charge, admitting in court that he had killed Bianca in a moment of jealous rage after seeing her kiss another man at the concert. In March 2021, Brandon Clark was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, with the judge condemning his actions as evil and noting that his decision to post photos of Bianca's body demonstrated a level of callousness and cruelty that warranted the maximum sentence under the law. The case sparked important conversations about the responsibility of social media platforms to prevent the spread of graphic violent content, the ways in which online communities can enable and amplify violence against women, and the particular vulnerability of young women who build public personas online and may attract obsessive and dangerous individuals who feel entitled to their attention and affection. Bianca's family established a foundation in her name dedicated to combating online harassment and advocating for stronger content moderation policies, and they have worked with legislators to draft laws that would impose civil and criminal penalties on platforms that fail to promptly remove graphic violent content, and on individuals who deliberately share such content with the intent to cause harm. The Bianca's Law initiatives that emerged from this tragedy seek to create legal frameworks that hold both platforms and users accountable for the spread of graphic content depicting violence and death, recognizing that the trauma inflicted by such images extends far beyond the initial act of violence and continues to harm victims' families every time the photos are viewed and shared. Bianca's case also highlighted the phenomenon of e-girls and online personalities who face unique risks from obsessive fans and individuals who conflate online interaction with genuine intimate relationships, leading to increased awareness about the need for better safety measures, clearer boundaries, and more education about the dangers of parasocial relationships that can turn violent when reality doesn't match fantasy. Today, Bianca is remembered not just as a victim but as a vibrant young woman with a bright future who touched countless lives through her kindness and openness about mental health struggles. And her family's advocacy work continues to push for changes that could prevent similar tragedies and protect other young people navigating the complex and sometimes dangerous landscape of social media fame and online relationships. Number 3. Randy Stair. The Weiss Market Massacre live-streamed in spirit. In the early morning hours of June 8, 2017, 24-year-old Randy Stair arrived for his overnight shift at the Weiss Market supermarket in Tunkhannock, Pennsylvania, carrying with him not just the tools for stocking shelves but 2 shotguns and a detailed plan to commit mass murder that he had spent months preparing, documenting, and sharing with a small online community that would later express horror at how his descent into violent fantasy had gone unnoticed or unaddressed. Randy, who online went by the name Andrew Blaze and identified strongly with a female animated character named Ember from the Nickelodeon show Danny Phantom, had spent years creating YouTube videos, maintaining social media accounts, and building an elaborate online persona that became increasingly detached from reality as he developed an obsessive fantasy world where he believed he would die and be reincarnated as his beloved character in an alternate dimension. His online content had grown progressively darker throughout 2016 and 2017, with videos that explicitly discussed plans for a massacre, detailed his suicidal ideations, and expressed his desire to escape what he viewed as a meaningless existence in the real world by transitioning through death into his fantasy realm where he could exist as Ember forever. In the months before the attack, Randy had purchased 2 Savage Arms 12-gauge pump-action shotguns legally, despite his well-documented mental health struggles and the alarming content he had been posting online, highlighting failures in background check systems that don't adequately screen for individuals whose social media presence reveals clear warning signs of violent intent. Randy's YouTube channel and social media posts contained numerous red flags, including videos titled Suicide Tapes, where he explicitly stated his plans to commit a shooting, detailed discussions of his methodology, and farewell messages to online friends. Yet these posts did not trigger intervention from platforms, law enforcement, or mental health professionals who might have prevented the tragedy. On the night of June 7th going into June 8th, Randy reported for his regular overnight shift at the Weiss Markets where he had worked for several years, and his co-workers that night included 3 other employees who were working with him to stock shelves and prepare the store for opening the next morning. None of them aware that Randy had brought weapons and was preparing to execute his long-planned attack. At approximately 11 p.m., shortly after the store had closed to customers, and while his co-workers were dispersed throughout the store performing their duties, Randy blocked the exits by chaining doors shut and strategically positioning heavy objects to prevent escape, then retrieved his shotguns from where he had hidden them and began his rampage. Randy first shot and killed 23-year-old Victoria Brong as she worked in one of the aisles, showing no hesitation or remorse as he executed a young woman who was simply trying to earn a living during a night shift at a grocery store. He then moved through the store hunting for his other co-workers, firing multiple shots and killing 47-year-old Terry Sterling and 26-year-old Brian Hayes, both of whom had no chance to defend themselves or escape from the blocked exits that Randy had carefully prepared. One co-worker, 25-year-old Kristen Newell, managed to hide in a break room and barricaded herself inside, remaining silent and terrified as she heard gunshots echoing through the store and desperately hoped that Randy would not find her hiding spot. After killing his 3 co-workers, Randy turned one of the shotguns on himself and committed suicide in the store, ending a rampage that had lasted only a few minutes but left 3 innocent people dead and shattered the sense of safety in a small Pennsylvania community where such violence seemed unthinkable. When police arrived at the scene after receiving reports of gunshots, they found the store locked and barricaded, and after forcing entry, they discovered the bodies of the 4 deceased individuals and found Kristen Newell still hiding in the break room. physically unharmed but severely traumatized by the experience of being hunted by a colleague who had transformed into a mass murderer. The investigation into Randy's background and motives revealed the extensive digital footprint he had left documenting his plans, with investigators finding hundreds of videos, social media posts, and digital files that made clear this was not a spontaneous act but a meticulously planned massacre that Randy had been openly preparing for months. His online content included detailed manifestos explaining his reasoning, videos showing him practicing with his shotguns and discussing his plans, and farewell messages to online acquaintances where he explicitly stated what he was going to do and when, raising serious questions about why this content had not triggered any intervention. The case highlighted multiple systemic failures, including the limitations of current background check systems that rely primarily on criminal history and involuntary mental health commitments, rather than examining publicly available social media content that could reveal violent intentions. The inadequate response from social media platforms that hosted Randy's increasingly violent content without flagging it for review or removal, and the lack of coordination between online communities, platforms, and law enforcement that might have enabled early intervention. Randy's online community, which consisted largely of other young people struggling with mental health issues and social isolation, expressed shock and guilt after the shooting, with many stating they had seen his posts but assumed he was joking or venting rather than seriously planning violence, while others admitted they had been concerned but didn't know how to report their concerns or whether doing so would even result in action. The three victims, Victoria Brong, Terry Sterling, and Brian Hayes, were remembered as hardworking individuals who died senselessly while simply doing their jobs, leaving behind grieving families who struggled to understand why their loved ones had been targeted by a coworker who had shown no previous signs of aggression or violence in person, even as he documented his violent fantasies online. The case prompted discussions about the responsibilities of social media platforms to actively monitor for and report content that indicates imminent violence, with critics arguing that platforms like YouTube should have detected and flagged Randy's explicit discussions of his plans and notified law enforcement before he could carry them out. It also raised questions about workplace safety and whether employers should be conducting social media background checks on employees, particularly those who will be working isolated overnight shifts where they have access to vulnerable coworkers and limited security oversight. Pennsylvania authorities reviewed the case for any potential legal violations by individuals who might have seen Randy's posts and failed to report them, but ultimately determined that while several people had moral responsibility for not taking his threats seriously, there were no clear legal mechanisms to hold them accountable under existing laws. The Weiss Market's location where the shooting occurred was closed temporarily for investigation and cleaning, and when it reopened, the company implemented additional security measures including better surveillance systems and protocols for employees working overnight shifts, though these changes came too late to save the three people who died. Randy Stair's case remains a chilling example of how online radicalization and self-isolation can transform troubled individuals into mass murderers, how digital platforms can serve as spaces where violence is planned and documented in plain sight without triggering intervention, and how the boundaries between online fantasy and real-world violence can dissolve when mental health struggles go unaddressed and warning signs are dismissed as mere internet posturing. The tragedy at Weiss Markets serves as a reminder that threats made online should never be dismissed as jokes or attention-seeking behavior, that social media companies have a responsibility to actively identify and respond to content indicating imminent violence, and that communities need better systems for connecting concerning online behavior with real-world intervention before fantasies of violence become brutal reality. Number 4. Nassim Aghdam, the YouTube headquarters attack that shook Silicon Valley. On April 3, 2018, 38-year-old Nassim Aghdam drove from her home in San Diego to YouTube's headquarters in San Bruno, California, walked onto the campus around lunchtime armed with a semi-automatic handgun, and opened fire on employees who were eating outside in the campus courtyard, injuring 3 people before taking her own life in an attack that was motivated not by terrorism or political ideology, but by her grievances against YouTube's policies and algorithms that she believed had unfairly suppressed her content and destroyed her ability to make money from her videos. Nassim was an unusual figure in the world of violent extremism because she didn't fit typical profiles of mass shooters or terrorists, being a vegan activist, animal rights advocate, and prolific content creator who maintained YouTube channels in multiple languages including English, Farsi, and Turkish, where she posted videos about veganism, exercise, art, and various other topics that she believed should have attracted large audiences but which she claimed were being deliberately suppressed by YouTube's recommendation algorithms. In the years leading up to the attack, Nassim had become increasingly obsessed with what she perceived as YouTube's unfair treatment of her content, posting lengthy screeds on her website and social media accounts, accusing the platform of filtering her videos, removing them from search results, and demonetizing her content in ways that prevented her from earning revenue despite the time and effort she invested in creating and uploading videos. Her website featured detailed comparisons showing how her videos had supposedly received millions of views before YouTube changed its algorithms, after which her view counts plummeted, and she framed this not as a natural result of changing user preferences or increased competition, but as a deliberate conspiracy by YouTube to silence her voice and steal her rightful earnings. Nassim's family had noticed her growing obsession and deteriorating mental state, and her father had actually reported her missing to police in San Diego on March 31st after she left home unexpectedly. And when police in Mountain View located her sleeping in her car in a parking lot on April 2nd, they spoke with her briefly but found no evidence she posed a danger to herself or others and let her go, missing a critical opportunity to prevent the next day's attack. On the morning of April 3rd, Nassim drove approximately 20 miles from Mountain View to YouTube's headquarters in San Bruno, a sprawling campus that housed thousands of employees and had relatively open access despite being the headquarters of one of the world's most influential technology companies. At approximately 12:46 p.m., as employees were taking lunch breaks and gathering in the outdoor courtyard area, Nassim entered the campus through a parking garage entrance, made her way to the courtyard, and began shooting at people she encountered, firing approximately 20 shots in a chaotic spray of gunfire that sent employees running for cover and diving behind barriers as they tried to escape. Nassim shot and injured 3 people during her rampage: a 36-year-old woman who was shot in the chest and critically wounded, a 32-year-old man who was shot in the leg, and a 27-year-old woman who sustained injuries either from gunfire or from debris and shrapnel from bullets striking objects near her. As employees fled and called 911, Nassim continued through the courtyard area, and at approximately 12:53 p.m., she turned the gun on herself and committed suicide, ending the attack just minutes after it began but leaving behind chaos, terror, and 3 injured victims who would require hospitalization and extensive recovery. Police from San Bruno and surrounding jurisdictions responded within minutes to reports of an active shooter, arriving to find a scene of panic with hundreds of employees evacuating the building while others remained barricaded inside offices and conference rooms, unsure whether the shooting was over or if multiple attackers might still be active on the campus. Officers conducted a systematic search of the entire YouTube headquarters, clearing rooms and escorting employees to safety while also providing first aid to the wounded victims and establishing a perimeter to prevent anyone else from entering the campus. The investigation quickly identified Nassim as the shooter through witness descriptions and her body being found with the weapon, and detectives began the process of piecing together her background, motives, and how she had managed to gain access to the campus and carry out the attack. A search of Nassim's online presence revealed the extensive documentation of her grievances against YouTube, with her website featuring page after page of complaints about suppressed videos, lost revenue, and what she characterized as YouTube's discriminatory practices against creators who produce content that didn't align with corporate interests or advertiser-friendly guidelines. Her posts revealed someone who had become completely consumed by her belief that YouTube was engaged in a personal campaign against her, unable to accept that her declining view counts might be due to factors other than a deliberate conspiracy. and who had apparently decided that violence was the only way to draw attention to what she perceived as an injustice. Investigators found no evidence that Nassim had specifically targeted any individuals at YouTube, and the victims appear to have been random employees who happened to be in the courtyard area when she began shooting, suggesting her goal was to attack the company as an entity rather than harm specific people, though this distinction offered little comfort to those who were shot or traumatized by the attack. The 3 victims survived their injuries but faced long recoveries, with the woman who was shot in the chest requiring multiple surgeries and extended hospitalization, while the other victims dealt with both physical injuries and severe psychological trauma from being shot at by someone targeting their workplace. The attack on YouTube headquarters sent shockwaves through Silicon Valley and the broader tech industry, raising questions about security at technology campuses that had traditionally maintained relatively open environments with easy public access, in contrast to the heavily fortified security found at many corporate headquarters in other industries. YouTube and its parent company Google immediately increased security measures at all their facilities, implementing stricter access controls, increased security personnel, and enhanced screening procedures, while also providing counseling and mental health support to employees who had witnessed or been affected by the shooting. The case also prompted difficult discussions within YouTube and the broader content creation community about the company's algorithms, monetization policies, and the impact these systems have on creators who invest significant time and energy into producing content only to see their audiences and income disappear due to changes in recommendation algorithms or content policies. While virtually no one condoned Nassim's violent actions, her attack did highlight real frustrations that many content creators felt about YouTube's opaque decision-making processes, sudden policy changes that could devastate their livelihoods, and the lack of meaningful appeals or human review when creators believed they had been unfairly treated by automated systems. YouTube responded by promising to improve communication with creators and provide better resources for those who felt their content had been unfairly demonetized or suppressed. Though critics argued these changes were largely superficial and didn't address the fundamental power imbalance between the platform and the creators who depended on it for income. Nassim Agdam was not charged with any crimes because she died at the scene, but if she had survived, she would have faced multiple counts of attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and potentially federal charges related to the attack on a major corporate facility. The broader implications of her attack extended beyond the immediate trauma to victims and employees, raising questions about how platforms should balance the need to moderate content and adjust algorithms to serve user interests with the responsibility to treat creators fairly and transparently, especially when those creators have built their livelihoods around the platform. Mental health professionals noted that Nassim's case demonstrated how fixation on perceived injustice, combined with social isolation and possibly underlying mental health conditions, could drive someone to violence even when the grievance itself might have some basis in reality regarding how platforms operate. The incident also sparked debates about gun access and whether Nassim's family's concerns about her mental state should have been sufficient to trigger some form of intervention or evaluation that might have prevented her from purchasing a firearm or carrying out her plan. Today, the YouTube shooting is remembered as a tragic example of how digital platforms have become so central to people's identities and livelihoods that conflicts over algorithms and content policies can escalate to real-world violence, how technology companies must balance openness and security in an era of increasing threats, and how the parasocial relationships between creators and platforms can sometimes mirror the intensity and potential danger of human relationships when things go wrong. Number 5. Stephan Balliet. The Halle Synagogue attack live-streamed on Twitch. On October 9, 2019, 27-year-old Stephan Balliet drove to a synagogue in Halle, Germany, on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, wearing military-style gear and armed with multiple homemade firearms and explosive devices, with the explicit intention of massacring as many Jewish worshippers as possible while live-streaming his attack to the world on the gaming platform Twitch, in an assault that combined the worst elements of far-right terrorism, anti-Semitism, live-streamed violence, and image board radicalization. Stephan had spent years consuming extremist content on websites like 8chan and similar platforms where white supremacist ideology, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and celebrations of previous mass shooters created a toxic ecosystem that normalized violence against minorities and encouraged isolated individuals to seek notoriety through spectacular acts of terror. His radicalization followed a pattern disturbingly similar to other recent far-right terrorists, including the Christchurch mosque shooter and the El Paso Walmart shooter, where disaffected young men consumed hours of racist propaganda online, developed elaborate justifications for mass violence, and ultimately decided to live-stream their attacks as a form of propaganda designed to inspire copycat attacks and spread fear among their targeted communities. In the weeks before the attack, Stefan prepared meticulously, constructing crude but functional firearms in his home workshop because Germany's strict gun laws made it difficult for him to obtain commercial weapons, creating explosive devices from readily available materials, and writing a manifesto filled with anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, racist pseudoscience, and explicit statements that his goal was to kill as many Jews as possible to fight against what he perceived as a Jewish conspiracy to destroy white European civilization. On the morning of October 9th, Stefan mounted multiple cameras on his body and helmet to ensure the attack would be captured from multiple angles, tested his live streaming equipment to ensure it would successfully broadcast to Twitch, and drove to the synagogue where he knew Jewish worshippers would be gathered for Yom Kippur services, deliberately choosing the holiest day of the Jewish year to maximize the symbolic impact of his planned massacre. At approximately 12:05 p.m., Stefan arrived at the synagogue and began his attack by attempting to breach the building's security doors, firing his homemade weapons and throwing explosive devices at the entrance in an effort to gain access to the approximately 80 worshippers gathered inside for services. The synagogue's security measures, which had been installed due to rising anti-Semitic threats in Germany and across Europe, held against Stefan's assault, with reinforced doors and secure locks preventing him from entering the building despite his repeated attempts to shoot through or blow open the entrance. Frustrated by his inability to reach his primary targets, Stefan became increasingly erratic and violent, shooting at the building, yelling anti-Semitic slurs, and expressing his anger on the live stream that was broadcasting his failure to the small audience that had found the stream on Twitch. Unable to enter the synagogue, Stefan turned his violence toward random passersby, first shooting and killing 40-year-old Jana Lang, a woman who had been walking past the synagogue and who was murdered simply because she happened to be in the area when Stefan needed to vent his rage at his failed primary attack. He then moved through the surrounding streets, shooting at people and buildings in a chaotic rampage that bore no resemblance to the calculated massacre he had envisioned, instead becoming a disorganized killing spree that exposed him as a pathetic and incompetent terrorist whose homemade weapons repeatedly malfunctioned and whose careful planning crumbled in the face of reality. Stefan next targeted a nearby Turkish restaurant, presumably because his racist ideology led him to view Muslim immigrants as secondary targets if he could not kill Jews, and he shot and killed 20-year-old Kevin Schwartz, a German man who was eating lunch at the restaurant and became Stefan's second victim, killed for no reason other than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Inside the synagogue, worshippers who had heard the gunshots and explosions had barricaded themselves inside and were huddled in terror, calling police and desperately hoping that the doors would continue to hold against the attacker outside, while the synagogue's security guard and community leaders tried to keep people calm and prevent panic while ensuring everyone stayed away from windows and exterior walls. Police responded to multiple reports of an active shooter and arrived on the scene within minutes, engaging Stefan in a running gunfight through the streets of Halle as he attempted to escape in his vehicle. And during this pursuit, Stefan was shot and wounded by police, though he managed to temporarily evade capture by fleeing in his car. The live stream continued throughout this entire sequence, broadcasting Stefan's failures, his victims' murders, and his eventual flight from police to the small audience watching on Twitch, though the platform took approximately 35 minutes to identify and shut down the stream, during which time it had been viewed by approximately 2,200 people and had already been recorded and archived by users who would later redistribute it across the internet. The total duration of Stefan's attack from the first shots at the synagogue to his eventual capture was approximately 90 minutes, during which he killed 2 innocent people, injured multiple others, terrorized an entire community, and failed completely in his stated goal of murdering Jewish worshippers, prevented only by the synagogue's security measures and the quick response of German police. Stefan was apprehended later that afternoon after crashing his vehicle and attempting to flee on foot, and he was taken into custody with gunshot wounds that required hospitalization but were not life-threatening, ensuring he would survive to face justice for his crimes. The investigation revealed the full extent of Stefan's planning, his online radicalization, and his connections to international networks of far-right extremists who celebrated his attack online despite its failure to achieve its objectives, with investigators finding evidence that Stefan had been active on platforms where users shared terrorist propaganda, discussed attack strategies, and encouraged each other to commit violence. Stefan was charged with 2 counts of murder, multiple counts of attempted murder for his assault on the synagogue and shooting at police, and various weapons and explosives violations, and he was held without bail as prosecutors prepared their case against him. During his trial, which began in July 2020, Stefan showed no remorse for his actions, instead using the courtroom as a platform to spew anti-Semitic and racist rhetoric, attacking his victims' families, and expressing his only regret as not having killed more people, behavior that disgusted observers and demonstrated his complete lack of humanity or moral conscience. The court heard testimony from survivors who described the terror of being trapped in the synagogue while Stefan attempted to break in and kill them, from first responders who engaged him in the streets, and from family members of Jana Lang and Kevin Schwartz who spoke about the devastating impact of losing their loved ones to senseless racist violence. In December 2020, Stefan Ballier was convicted on all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment with special severity, a designation under German law that means he will serve a minimum of 15 years before even being eligible for parole consideration and will likely remain imprisoned for the rest of his life given the severity of his crimes and his lack of remorse. The case prompted intense scrutiny of how live streaming platforms handle violent content, with Twitch facing criticism for taking 35 minutes to shut down a stream that clearly showed a violent attack in progress, and the platform subsequently implemented new content moderation policies and improved its systems for detecting and removing violent content in real time. It also highlighted the ongoing problem of far-right radicalization on anonymous image boards and forums where extremist ideology is normalized and celebrated, with security experts warning that platforms like 8chan and its successors continue to serve as incubators for terrorist violence and calling for more aggressive action to shut down these spaces. The German government responded by increasing security funding for synagogues and other Jewish institutions, improving coordination between law enforcement and Jewish community leaders on security matters, and launching new initiatives to combat anti-Semitism and right-wing extremism through education, intervention programs, and more aggressive prosecution of hate crimes. The Halle synagogue community, while traumatized by the attack, expressed gratitude that their security measures had prevented a much larger massacre and committed to continuing their religious practices despite the attempted attack, refusing to allow terrorism to drive them into hiding or silence. The 2 victims, Jana Lang and Kevin Schwartz, were mourned as innocent people whose lives were stolen by hatred and bigotry, with memorial services that emphasized their humanity and the senselessness of their murders while also calling for continued vigilance against extremism. Today, the Halle synagogue attack serves as a chilling reminder of the persistent threat of antis. Number 6. Brenton Tarrant. The Christchurch massacre that redefined livestream terror. On March 15, 2019, 28-year-old Australian white supremacist Brenton Tarrant walked into 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, during Friday prayers and methodically executed 51 Muslim worshippers while live-streaming the entire attack on Facebook Live in what became the deadliest mass shooting in New Zealand's history and one of the most widely disseminated acts of terrorist violence ever recorded, combining extreme right-wing ideology, meticulous planning, and exploitation of social media platforms to create a propaganda tool designed to inspire copycat attacks around the world. Brenton had spent years traveling internationally, visiting countries across Europe and Asia while documenting what he claimed were examples of white displacement and Muslim immigration that he viewed as existential threats to Western civilization. And during these travels, he consumed massive amounts of far-right propaganda online, engaged with white nationalist communities on platforms like 8chan, and gradually developed an ideology that combined white supremacism, anti-Muslim hatred, fascism, and accelerationism, a belief that violent attacks could hasten the collapse of liberal democracy and spark a race war. In the months before the attack, Brenton moved to New Zealand where he began systematic preparations for his planned massacre, legally obtaining a firearms license by joining a gun club and presenting himself as a responsible sport shooter interested in hunting, then purchasing military-style semi-automatic rifles and thousands of rounds of ammunition, while simultaneously writing an extensive manifesto that explained his ideology and motivations, creating social media accounts to distribute his propaganda and conducting reconnaissance of potential target locations throughout Christchurch. His manifesto, titled The Great Replacement, ran to 74 pages of dense white nationalist ideology mixed with internet memes, references to previous mass shooters, explanations of his tactical planning, and explicit statements that his goal was to kill as many Muslims as possible to fight against what he perceived as the invasion of Western countries by non-white immigrants who were supposedly replacing white populations through higher birth rates and immigration policies. Brenton deliberately chose Friday, March 15th, because he knew mosques would be filled with worshippers attending the most important weekly prayers, and he specifically targeted the Al-Noor Mosque and Linwood Islamic Center in Christchurch because they were prominent Muslim institutions with large congregations that would maximize his body count and the psychological impact of his attack on Muslim communities worldwide. On the morning of the attack, Brenton mounted cameras to his body and helmet, connected them to live streaming equipment in his vehicle, tested the setup to ensure it would successfully broadcast to Facebook Live, and at approximately 1:40 p.m., he arrived at the Al-Noor Mosque where he began his meticulously planned massacre. The live stream captured every horrific moment as Brenton entered the mosque, where dozens of people were peacefully worshipping, and began systematically shooting people at close range, moving through the building executing wounded victims with single shots to ensure they were dead, returning to rooms he had already attacked to shoot survivors who were hiding or playing dead, and showing absolutely no emotion or hesitation as he murdered men, women, and children who were trapped inside the building with no means of escape or defense. The video showed Brenton firing more than 100 rounds inside the Al-Noor Mosque over the course of approximately 6 minutes, killing 44 people in a sustained barrage of gunfire that demonstrated his extensive preparation and complete lack of humanity as he treated human beings as targets in what resembled a video game more than reality. After completing his massacre at Al-Noor, Brenton returned to his vehicle, which contained additional weapons and ammunition, and drove approximately 3 miles to the Linwood Islamic Center where he planned to continue his attack, and during this drive, he played music and made comments to the camera that were chilling in their casual tone, as if he had just completed an ordinary task rather than committing mass murder. At the Linwood Islamic Center, Brenton again began shooting at worshippers, but this time he encountered resistance from Abdul Aziz, a 48-year-old Afghan refugee who confronted Brenton and threw objects at him in an attempt to stop the attack, and this unexpected resistance, combined with the arrival of police who were now responding to reports from the Al-Noor Mosque, caused Brenton to flee after killing 7 people at the second location, preventing what would have been an even larger massacre. Brenton attempted to drive away from Christchurch but was intercepted by police officers who had received descriptions of his vehicle, and in a traffic stop that was later praised for its professionalism and courage, 2 officers used their patrol car to ram Brenton's vehicle off the road and then approached on foot, ordering him out at gunpoint and arresting him without firing a shot despite knowing he was armed and had just committed a mass murder. The entire attack from the first shots at Al-Noor to Brenton's arrest lasted approximately 21 minutes, during which he killed 51 people and injured 40 others, and the live stream had broadcast the first mosque attack in real time to Facebook before the platform's systems detected and removed it approximately 17 minutes after the stream began. However, by that time, users had already recorded the video, and within hours, it had been uploaded to virtually every major platform on the internet, including YouTube, Twitter, Facebook itself, Reddit, 4chan, 8chan, and countless other websites, with millions of views accumulated as people sought out the footage out of morbid curiosity, while others deliberately spread it as terrorist propaganda or to traumatize Muslim viewers. Social media platforms struggled desperately to contain the spread, with Facebook alone reporting that it had removed 1.5 million uploads of the video in the first 24 hours. But the sheer scale of the problem overwhelmed moderation systems, and the video continued to circulate for weeks, creating ongoing trauma for survivors and victims' families, who knew that their loved ones' murders were being watched by strangers around the world. The New Zealand government took unprecedented action by making it illegal to possess or distribute the video under the country's objectionable publications laws, threatening criminal prosecution for anyone who shared it. But enforcement proved difficult given the borderless nature of the internet and the determination of some users to continue spreading the footage. Brenton was immediately charged with murder, and in the days following the attack, the charges were expanded to include 51 counts of murder, 40 counts of attempted murder, and terrorism charges under New Zealand law, making him the first person ever charged with terrorism in New Zealand's history. The investigation revealed the extent of Brenton's planning, his connections to international far-right networks, and his deliberate strategy of using the attack as propaganda to inspire others, with his manifesto being downloaded tens of thousands of times before platforms began removing it and law enforcement agencies around the world investigated whether anyone had advanced knowledge of his plans or had provided support. During his trial proceedings, Brenton initially pleaded not guilty and appeared to be preparing to use the trial as a platform for his ideology. But in March 2020, he suddenly changed his plea to guilty on all charges, a decision that surprised many observers and prevented a lengthy trial that would have forced survivors and victims' families to relive the trauma in extensive detail. In August 2020, Brenton Tarrant was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, the first time in New Zealand's history that this sentence had been imposed, with the judge stating that his crimes were so wicked and inhuman that no finite sentence would be sufficient and that he should spend the rest of his life in prison with no hope of ever being released. The sentencing hearing included powerful victim impact statements from survivors and family members who described the devastating impact of losing loved ones to racist terrorism, with many speakers emphasizing their determination not to let hatred win and their commitment to rebuilding their communities and maintaining their faith despite the trauma. The Christchurch attacks prompted a global reckoning with how social media platforms handle violent extremist content and live-streamed violence, with the Christchurch call bringing together governments and tech companies to develop new approaches to preventing the spread of terrorist content online. Though implementation has been uneven and critics argue much more needs to be done. New Zealand also moved swiftly to ban military-style semi-automatic weapons and implemented a gun buyback program that removed tens of thousands of weapons from circulation, though debates continued about whether these measures adequately addressed the underlying issues or simply created the appearance of action. The Muslim community in Christchurch and throughout New Zealand responded with remarkable resilience and grace, refusing to be driven away by terrorism and instead receiving an outpouring of support from New Zealanders of all backgrounds who stood in solidarity with their Muslim neighbors and rejected the ideology of hatred that motivated the attack. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern received international praise for her compassionate leadership in the aftermath, wearing a hijab when meeting with Muslim community members, ensuring victims' families received support, and pushing through gun law reforms while refusing to speak the shooter's name and denying him the notoriety he sought. Today, the Christchurch mosque attacks remain a watershed moment in understanding how internet radicalization, live streaming technology, and white supremacist terrorism converge to create new forms of violence that are designed not just to kill but to spread fear and inspire imitators through viral videos and manifestos that turn mass murder into propaganda. And the ongoing struggle to prevent similar attacks requires continued vigilance, better content moderation, addressing the root causes of extremism, and supporting communities targeted by such violence. Number 7. Alexander Kluev, the Russian blogger's murder-suicide stream. On February 6, 2017, 20-year-old Russian blogger Alexander Kluev, known online as Stas Reflay, was conducting a live stream from his apartment in Moscow on Periscope, a live streaming platform owned by Twitter, when he subjected his unconscious girlfriend to freezing temperatures in an attempt to earn money from viewers through donations and tips, resulting in her death on camera in a horrific incident that exposed the dark side of donation-driven live streaming culture, where content creators sometimes engage in increasingly extreme and dangerous behavior to generate revenue and maintain viewer attention. Alexander had built a following on Russian social media platforms and live streaming services by creating controversial content that pushed boundaries and courted shock value, including videos where he and his girlfriend Valentina Grigorieva engaged in risky stunts, consumed excessive alcohol on camera, and responded to viewer requests that became progressively more dangerous as Alexander sought to maximize donations from his audience. On the night of February 5th, going into the early morning of February 6th, Alexander was live streaming as usual with Valentina present, and both had been drinking heavily throughout the broadcast when Alexander announced to his viewers that he would take requests in exchange for donations, a common practice among live streamers where audience members pay money to influence the content and request specific actions from the broadcaster. According to viewer accounts and the live stream footage that was later recovered by investigators, someone in the audience donated approximately 1,000 Russian rubles, equivalent to about $15, and requested that Alexander make Valentina go outside in her underwear despite the fact that it was winter in Moscow with temperatures around -15 degrees Celsius, or approximately 5 degrees Fahrenheit. In a decision that can only be described as criminally negligent and ultimately fatal, Alexander agreed to the request, and despite Valentina being heavily intoxicated and barely conscious, he dressed her in only underwear and forced her outside onto the balcony of their apartment where she was exposed to the freezing temperatures while he continued live streaming and collecting donations from viewers who were watching this dangerous situation unfold in real time. Valentina remained outside for an extended period, and viewers later reported that she appeared to lose consciousness while on the balcony, but Alexander either did not notice or did not care about her condition, continuing his stream and responding to other comments and donation requests rather than bringing her back inside and ensuring her safety. When Alexander finally brought Valentina back into the apartment, she was unconscious and unresponsive, showing clear signs of severe hypothermia. But instead of immediately calling emergency services, Alexander continued live streaming and attempted to revive her by spraying her with cold water, a completely inappropriate response that demonstrated his prioritization of maintaining the stream and continuing to generate content over his girlfriend's immediate medical needs. The live stream footage showed Alexander becoming increasingly panicked as he realized Valentina was not responding to his attempts to wake her, and viewers watching in real time began urging him in the chat to call an ambulance and stop streaming. But critical minutes were lost as Alexander appeared more concerned with managing his online audience than with getting emergency medical help for the woman who was dying in front of him. Eventually, Alexander did call emergency services, but by the time paramedics arrived at the apartment, Valentina Grigorieva had died from severe hypothermia complicated by alcohol intoxication, her body temperature having dropped to fatal levels during her exposure to freezing temperatures while she was too intoxicated to recognize the danger or take protective action. The live stream continued even as paramedics worked on Valentina's body, capturing Alexander's reactions as he realized the severity of what had happened and began to comprehend that his pursuit of donations and viewer engagement had resulted in his girlfriend's death on camera in front of an audience that had watched the entire tragedy unfold. Russian authorities immediately launched an investigation into the incident, reviewing the live stream footage, interviewing viewers who had watched the events unfold, and examining the circumstances that led to Valentina's death. And within days, Alexander was arrested and charged with causing death by negligence, a criminal offense under Russian law that carries potential prison time. The case sparked outrage in Russia and internationally, with many people expressing horror that someone would be so focused on earning money from live streaming that they would put another person's life at risk. And it raised serious questions about the responsibilities of live streaming platforms and viewers in situations where dangerous or potentially fatal activities are being broadcast in real time. Critics pointed out that viewers who donated money requesting dangerous actions, who continued watching without reporting the stream to authorities, or who encouraged Alexander to continue rather than helping Valentina all bore some moral responsibility for enabling the tragedy, though Russian law did not provide clear mechanisms for holding them legally accountable. Periscope, the platform where the incident occurred, faced criticism for not having adequate systems to detect and intervene in streams showing dangerous or potentially harmful activities, particularly those involving intoxicated individuals being subjected to extreme conditions, and the company subsequently reviewed its content moderation policies and systems for responding to emergencies broadcast on its platform. The investigation revealed that live streaming had become Alexander's primary source of income, creating perverse incentives where he felt pressure to constantly escalate the shock value and danger of his content to maintain viewer interest and generate donations, a problem that affects many content creators who become dependent on algorithmic recommendation systems and audience generosity that reward extreme or controversial material. Valentina Grigorieva was remembered by friends and family as a young woman who had struggled with alcohol dependency and had become trapped in a toxic relationship with Alexander, where live streaming their lives had become more important than their safety, dignity, or well-being. And her death was mourned as a preventable tragedy that resulted from the intersection of addiction, exploitation, and the perverse incentives created by donation-driven live streaming culture. During his trial, which began later in 2017, Alexander claimed he had not intended to harm Valentina and had not realized how serious the situation was until it was too late, arguing that his intoxication and focus on the live stream had impaired his judgment. But prosecutors presented evidence that he had been warned by viewers that Valentina was in danger and had deliberately chosen to continue streaming rather than prioritize her safety. In December 2021, after delays related to COVID-19 and various procedural matters, Alexander Kluev was convicted of causing death by negligence and sentenced to 6 years in a Russian penal colony, a sentence that many felt was insufficient given the egregious nature of his actions and the fact that he had essentially tortured his girlfriend to death on camera for money. The case prompted discussions about whether live streaming platforms should implement mandatory safety features such as automatic detection of dangerous situations, required delays before streams go live that would allow for content review, or systems that automatically alert authorities when streams show potential emergencies, though implementation of such systems faces technical and privacy challenges. It also highlighted the need for better education about the dangers of hypothermia, the particular risks of cold exposure combined with alcohol intoxication, and the responsibilities that content creators and their audiences have to prioritize human safety over entertainment value and financial gain. Valentina's family filed civil suits seeking damages from both Alexander and potentially from the platform, arguing that better moderation systems might have prevented her death or at least triggered intervention before the situation became fatal, though the outcomes of these legal actions remained unclear given the complexities of establishing platform liability for user-generated content. Today, the case of Alexander Kluev and Valentina Grigorieva serves as a tragic reminder of how live streaming culture can create dangerous incentives that lead content creators to prioritize audience engagement and donations over safety, how viewers can become complicit in harmful activities by requesting and financially supporting dangerous content, and how the immediacy and intimacy of live streaming can make audiences feel like participants in events rather than witnesses with responsibilities to intervene when harm is occurring, all while platforms struggle with the challenge of moderating real-time content at scale and balancing free expression with the need to prevent their services from becoming venues for exploitation, abuse, and preventable deaths broadcast for entertainment. Number 8. Philip Manshau's The Bahram Mosque Shooting Attempt and Familicide. On August 10, 2019, 21-year-old Philip Manshau's armed himself with multiple firearms, drove to the Al-Noor Islamic Center Mosque in Bærum, Norway, and attempted to carry out a mass shooting of Muslim worshippers during afternoon prayers, an attack that was prevented by the heroic intervention of 75-year-old worshipper Mohammed Rafiq, who tackled and subdued Manshaus despite being shot in the attempt, but which was preceded by an even more horrific crime that same day when Manshaus murdered his own 17-year-old adopted stepsister Johan Jongja Illa Hansen in their family home before heading to the mosque, creating a domestic international terrorism case that combined family violence with religious hatred and was directly inspired by other live-streamed mass shootings. Philip had become radicalized through exposure to far-right extremist content online, particularly spending time on forums and image boards where users celebrated the Christchurch mosque shooter and other white supremacist terrorists. And in the months before his attack, he had absorbed massive amounts of racist and anti-Semitic propaganda that convinced him Muslims and Jews were destroying European civilization and that violent action was necessary to resist what he viewed as white genocide. Through immigration and multiculturalism, his online activity showed clear warning signs, including posting statements about his intentions on forums, expressing admiration for previous mass shooters, and consuming tactical information about how to conduct attacks. But none of this activity triggered intervention from law enforcement despite Norway's experience with far-right terrorism following the 2011 Anders Breivik massacre that killed 77 people. On the morning of August 10th, Philip wrote posts on various online platforms indicating he was about to commit an attack and suggesting followers should watch for a live stream, though the specific platform and timing were not specified, and these posts went unnoticed by authorities who might have intervened before he could act. Before leaving for the mosque, Philip murdered his 17-year-old stepsister Johan in their family home in what appears to have been motivated by a combination of racist hatred. As Johan had been adopted from China and Philip's white supremacist ideology made him view her as an unacceptable presence in his family, and by a desire to prevent her from stopping his planned attack or alerting authorities. The murder of Johan was brutal and calculated, and Philip showed no remorse or hesitation before leaving her body in the house and driving to the mosque armed with 2 shotguns and a rifle with the intention of killing as many Muslims as possible in an attack he hoped to livestream similar to the Christchurch shooters massacre. At approximately 4 p.m., Philip arrived at the Al-Noor Islamic Center in Bærum where a small group of worshippers had gathered for afternoon prayers, and he entered the mosque wearing body armor and a helmet mounted with what appeared to be a camera for live streaming, though technical failures meant his stream never actually went live, denying him the audience and propaganda value he had sought. Philip began shooting immediately upon entering the mosque, firing at worshippers who scrambled for cover and attempted to escape the building. But his attack was quickly interrupted by Mohammed Rafiq, a 75-year-old retired Pakistani Air Force officer who was attending prayers that day and who made the split-second decision to tackle the armed attacker rather than flee. Mohammed charged at Philip and grabbed him, wrestling for control of the weapons despite being shot and injured in the struggle, and his courageous intervention prevented Philip from firing effectively and bought precious time for other worshippers to escape and for additional people to join in subduing the attacker. Other worshippers quickly joined Mohammed in restraining Philip, holding him down and taking control of his weapons until police arrived, turning what Philip had envisioned as a massacre into a heroic community response that saved countless lives through bravery and quick thinking. Police arrived at the scene within minutes and took Philip into custody, finding him injured from the struggle but still conscious and immediately recognizing this was a serious terrorist incident given the weapons, body armor, and obvious planning involved. During the initial investigation at the mosque, police learned about Philip's online posts suggesting he might have committed other crimes, and officers were dispatched to his family home where they made the horrific discovery of Joanne's body, revealing that the mosque attack was only part of a larger crime spree that had begun with domestic violence. The investigation into Philip's background revealed extensive evidence of radicalization, including saved manifestos from other mass shooters, participation in online forums where terrorist violence was celebrated, search history showing research into weapons and tactics, and digital communications indicating he had been planning some form of attack for months. Philip was charged with terrorism for the mosque attack, murder for killing his stepsister, and attempted murder for shooting Mohammed Rafiq and attempting to kill other worshippers at the mosque, facing the potential of Norway's maximum sentence of 21 years in prison, which can be extended indefinitely in 5-year increments if the prisoner is still considered dangerous. During his trial, which began in May 2020, Philip showed no remorse for his actions and instead used court appearances to espouse white supremacist ideology, make Nazi salutes, and attempt to spread his extremist views, behavior that disgusted observers and demonstrated his continued adherence to the violent ideology that had motivated his crimes. The prosecution presented extensive evidence of planning, his radicalization process, the brutality of his sister's murder, and the terroristic intent behind the mosque attack, while Philip's defense attorneys argued for mental health evaluations and suggested he might not have been criminally responsible due to psychological issues, though these arguments were ultimately rejected. The court heard powerful testimony from Mohammed Rafiq, who, despite his injuries and the trauma of being shot while preventing a massacre, spoke about his determination not to let hatred and violence succeed and his belief in the importance of protecting his community regardless of personal risk. Other witnesses included worshippers who described the terror of being attacked during prayers, forensic experts who detailed the evidence of planning and intent, and investigators who explained Philip's connections to international far-right extremist networks and his explicit inspiration from previous mass shooters. In June 2020, Philip Manshaus was convicted on all charges including terrorism, murder, and attempted murder, and he was sentenced to 21 years in prison, with the judge specifying that this would be the preventive detention that could be extended indefinitely, ensuring Philip would likely spend the rest of his life imprisoned given his lack of remorse and continued adherence to violent extremist ideology. The court specifically found that Philip's attack was an act of terrorism intended to intimidate the Muslim community and part of a broader far-right extremist campaign inspired by international terrorist propaganda and previous attacks. Johan Jongjila Hansen was mourned by her family and community as a bright young woman whose life was stolen by racist hatred, and her death sparked conversations about adoption, racism within families, and the particular vulnerabilities of young people of color who may face hatred even within their own homes from radicalized family members. Mohammed Rafiq was celebrated as a hero whose courage prevented what could have been a mass casualty event, receiving recognition from Norwegian authorities and international praise for his selfless act of defending his community at great personal risk, and his actions were held up as an example of how individuals can make a difference in stopping terrorism through bravery and quick thinking. The case prompted renewed focus on far-right extremism in Norway and across Europe, with authorities implementing new programs to identify and intervene with individuals showing signs of radicalization, improving monitoring of extremist online spaces, and working to counter the spread of terrorist propaganda that inspired attacks like Philip's. It also highlighted the ongoing influence of live-streamed attacks like Christchurch, with investigators noting that Philip's planning and tactics were directly copied from that incident and that the propaganda value of such attacks continues to inspire would-be terrorists even when technical failures prevent the actual live streaming from occurring. Today, the Bahram Mosque attack serves as both a warning about the persistent threat of far-right terrorism and an inspiring example of community heroism that can prevent mass casualties. While Joanne's murder reminds us that radicalization doesn't just threaten strangers, but can turn family members into victims of ideological hatred that overwhelms personal bonds and human decency.